You're listening to 90.3 WHPC, the voice of Nassau Community College in Garden City, New York. I'm Bill McIntyre here with Jon Gallo, bringing you news stories about Long Island and about Long Islanders. We would like to welcome Mr. Phillip Eng, who's the president of the Long Island Railroad, and we thank you for joining us today. I know your time is probably covered for most of the time you go to work and you hit the ground running. So I know we don't have a lot of time. So let's see if we can get right into some questions here.
Go ahead, Bill.
Can you tell us, like right now, the current status of the railroad? I mean, I know the trains are running, but do we have a number of trains like before the virus hit us and we had all this craziness?
So typically before the virus hit, our weekday service was about 750 trains a day. We're running about 90% of that service right now, probably around 680 trains a day. That is the intention for that is to give our ridership the ability to still have sufficient service and give them options. So right now we are carrying about 28% of our normal ridership during the week, 50% on weekends. Before the pandemic, we had seen 2 straight years of record ridership, over 91 million riders a year. We were proud of that. And we know that Long Island needs the railroad. We've been here for 186 years, supporting and growing the economy. And we know that we're a key part of Long Island's revitalization from this pandemic.
Yeah. Oh, definitely.
Of course. Definitely.
I don't know what Long Island would be without the Long Island Railroad. I mean.
Oh, yeah. A lot of our, kind of housing is developed around access to the railroad to get to the city and to get where people need to get to carry on their lives. To that point, obviously it impacts people's lives, but we know if there's decreased ridership, it obviously is going to impact the fiscal status of the MTA and the LIRR. So could you speak a little bit about that in terms of, what we're seeing? I know, is it still that peak tickets are tickets are still classified as off peak right now, and are those methods, soon to change to try to make up for some of those losses, or where do you see that kind of going?
Well, John, you're right. We're still charging off-peak fares. We want the ridership to know that we understand that these are trying times for everybody. But what we will be doing is later in the year, looking at other avenues to, really clamp down on how we spend our dollars. I think everyone knows that the MTA has asked the federal government for $12 billion, and there's no single entity that could fund that type of shortfall other than the federal government. We're really optimistic and hopeful that there will be a second HEROES Act. We know that the dialogue is ongoing, and that would carry us to the end of 2021 if we were to see that sort of relief. Short of that, none of us want to envision what it would be, but we'd be forced to consider service cuts. We'd be forced to consider all sorts of things that are really unfathomable with regards to the need, because even though we have less ridership, those people using our trains, it's essential to them. And from the beginning of the pandemic, we've been carrying healthcare workers and utility workers and grocery store clerks and folks that have helped us get through this pandemic. The Long Island Railroad workforce themselves are heroes as well. They've been working throughout it all. And we found a way to continue to do it safely. We flattened the curve like the rest of Long Island, the rest of New York. We all need to stay vigilant right now, continue wearing face coverings, continue the health habits of hand sanitizer, washing your hands, and staying home if you're not feeling well. It's really not hard to do. It's just a matter of us staying vigilant and doing that.
Definitely keeping the discipline and leading by example. Real quick, just to follow up, Bill, on that. I know there had been, news, lately that regarding the FEMA change in protocols with safety and sterilization. And again, is that still correct that that funding is being pulled, that reimbursement, which was vital for not just, it looks like the Long Island Railroad, but also, I believe, schools and court buildings and other essential types of environments like that. Could you speak to that?
We unfortunately found that unconscionable that they would pull that funding. From the very beginning, we wanted to ensure that everything that anyone needed to do on the Long Island Railroad, they could do it safely. And we had unforeseen issues, but we went out and we've been disinfecting our train cars every day. We've been disinfecting our stations twice a day. It's unprecedented levels of cleaning, not only here on Long Island Railroad, but across all of MTA. It has been one key component of ensuring that any transfer potential of this virus via touching of surfaces is negated. We're going to continue to do that. It's vital right now. But we know that it's one of those things that our riders make them feel a little more comfortable. And again, every step that we can do to add and give them a sense of comfort, we're going to continue to do that.
Yeah. There's two things I was curious about. One was there's supposedly a law on the books that if you're on a train without a mask, you can get a $50 fine.
That's correct, Bill. In fact, we've been very pleased with the ridership. They've actually adhered to wearing a face covering. Early on, survey showed 93% of our riders were wearing face coverings. We've done subsequent surveys, and then once the $50 fine was issued or enacted, and that's a last resort, by the way, Bill. We are continuing to give out free face coverings at our stations, at ticket windows. Myself, I give out coverings if people need them. We have ambassadors throughout the system offering face coverings. So we're doing everything we can to make sure that people that have one have a spare if they need. Hand sanitizers available in our stations. But once we enacted the law that gives the police the ability to issue a fine, we've seen the face covering usage go up to about 97, 98%. We're not going to stop until we see them all wearing them. Again, it's another simple act, and it not only protects yourself, but it's a sign of respect because it protects others as well.
There you go. I hear that. Along with that, there's a story that we've been hearing about the air purification system. Is that ongoing, or have they started to do something with that? Yeah.
We're very excited about that. First, I want to tell all of the viewers that the existing system filters the air 44 times an hour. That's every 80 seconds, the air is being filtered. And not only that, in that filtering continuous process, 30% of that air that's returning is fresh air. So the train cars themselves are getting fully recycled fresh air 12 times an hour every 4 or 5 minutes. So you can ride the train today safely. A recent study from APTA showed that there is no direct correlation between the spread of the virus and the use of mass transportation. But having said that, we also want to continue to explore technology. We've been doing that since the very beginning, using technology to help us solve problems. And right now we're in the midst of getting a prototype that will replace the intake filter with an electric grid. That electric grid will actually kill 100%, 99.9995% of all airborne viruses, including COVID-19 and bacteria. And then it'll have a second phase of ionized air particles that helps bring down particles and takes them out of the air. So that's an added level of safety that we're exploring. We're very excited about it. We'll have that prototype installed this month.
That's great. Great to hear how much innovation is being utilized, and no technology is not being, used if it's has the benefit of safety for riders and everyone involved. Let's just kind of focus and close up maybe with how the pandemic and the issues that we've discussed may impact some of the long-term plans and goals of the LIRR and MTA for that matter. Specifically regarding the Penn Station plans, we know that there was a discussion about obviously the upgrades that you see now, but also kind of a bridge plans that the governor has spoken about in the past, as well as maybe some other local things, ADA accessibility kind of upgrades, if that's been kind of had any taken to the back burner kind of situations, as well as I know there has been some progress in Mineola where they expanding the tracks and things are getting done. But can you just speak, again, generally to how it has impacted those types of circumstances going forward?
Sure. Well, the capital program was a historic one. The 20 to 24 program was $51.2 billion. And it was going to enable us to do a tremendous amount of building for the future. Having said that, right now, new starts are on hold, but I'm pleased to say that a number of key initiatives are ongoing, and we're committed to continuing working on those along with our partners over at Construction and Development at MTA. So the mainline expansion that runs from Hicksville to Floral Park, that's the one that we're adding a third track. That one is ongoing. We just hit the midway point, and that project is on schedule, on budget, and that's going to give us tremendous flexibility for the future in terms of, as the workforce reinvents themselves, that is not only going to improve reliability, but it's going to give us the ability to run reverse peak and allow people that maybe are not always going into Manhattan in the morning, coming out to the island and attracting a strong, robust workforce here. We're also continuing to support and deliver the East Side Access. Both those projects are slated to be completed at 2022. East Side Access will now give Long Island Railroad riders the ability to go into Grand Central Terminal, saving time off of their commutes and giving them other options aside from Penn Station. And those are important projects because, as I mentioned earlier, we were carrying record ridership before the pandemic, and we know that the Long Island Railroad is a vital component to Long Island. It connects communities. It connects people to and from not only work, but places of enjoyment. And we know that post-pandemic, the railroad will be vital. And those are the types of projects that we needed and we continue to need to give us that operational flexibility and give our riders the flexibility and choices on how they can make their travel decisions.
To hear those two statements that you made about the construction is that it's on budget and ongoing, continuing. That's rare to hear about any construction, especially in the New York area.
Well, the MTA has been very focused on really showing the public that we're committed to spending taxpayer dollars wisely. It is an all-out effort to do that, improve service, improve reliability, but deliver on our commitments. So we're very pleased to be able to demonstrate that we can.
What would you say to someone if you had to convince them to ride the Long Island Railroad?
I would say I've been riding the trains every day since the beginning of the pandemic. I would say that my family has ridden the trains, and the railroad workforce continues to work on the trains. Once we flatten the curve, it's been virtually zero positives among the customer-facing workforce. As I mentioned earlier, the independent study shows there's no direct correlation between riding mass transportation and the spread of the virus. And I would say that there is right now plenty of room. In June, we launched an upgraded train time. It gives our customers the ability to see in real time just how crowded each train car is as it approaches. And it allows you to pick a train car that has less people on it. And then in September, we launched another upgrade to that. First in North America, by the way, not in the globe. The upgrade in September gives people the chance to pre-plan their trip. And it gives the ridership levels of a particular train over the last 7 days, continuously upgrading that information. So if you're thinking of a train tomorrow or whenever, you could say, the 9 o'clock train is too crowded, but the one at 9:15 actually has plenty of capacity. And again, during these unprecedented times, it gives people the comfort to be able to plan their trip better. And if having a little more space is what they need, they can certainly find that with this app.
That's all great. Thank you so much again.
Yeah, very cool. And thank you very much for carving out the little time we had, and promise me that we can talk to you in the future sometime. And
Absolutely. Any chance I get a chance to talk to the public and share information and let them know that we're doing everything we can and just how great the workforce has been is time well spent. So thank you very much.
Definitely.
Well, we thank you. We thank you very much for your time, and we'll talk to you soon.
Yep.
Good job. Thank you.
And now with us here on this week's Long Island News, we have Alfonso Castillo, who is a reporter for Newsday, who's been following a lot of Long Island Railroad issues since everything happened. I guess that's a way to say it. Hello, Alfonso. How are you?
I'm good. How are you? Thank you for having me on.
No, thank you for joining us in this busy news era. I'm sure you're kept plenty busy. Well, I'll tell you what. Well, you've been riding herd on the whole Long Island Railroad thing. I mean, there are so many issues with it. Maybe you could just give us an overview of what the situation is with the railroad now.
Well, it's certainly a challenging time for them, for the entire MTA. They're facing an unprecedented financial crisis brought on by the pandemic. It's pretty simple to put together. People aren't taking the trains, and so those fare dollars are not coming in. Right now, at least on the Long Island Railroad side, I think ridership is up to about a little more than I think 25%. I think the last figures I heard were 27, 28%. But still, that's more than 2/3 of their regular riders just not taking the train. And anyone who has taken the train in recent months knows it. The crowds that were commonplace in the rush hour are just not there. It's bounced back quite a bit from the height of the pandemic. I think at the very height, they were running with just about 3% of their ridership. So those trains were truly, truly empty. And the entire MTA says they're losing something like $200 million a week. They've been counting for a federal bailout. That they got one early in the pandemic back in March that got them, I think, $3.9 billion. They're looking for another $12 billion to get them through the rest of this year and next. But I think optimism is starting to wane, and they're starting to kind of look at Plan B, and Plan B may be devastating to commuters. It's service cuts. It's the highest fare hikes that you've seen in years. They've subsequently said that they may look to borrow some money, at least to get them through the end of this year. May be hopeful that after the election, there is a change in kind of some of the politics and dynamics in play here, and maybe their fortunes are a little bit better in 2021.
Yeah, definitely. At least hoping so. I know we did speak, right before our interview here with the LIRR President Phil Eng, who I know you've been covering for a long time, obviously along with the agencies that we just mentioned on your beat as the transit reporter over there at Newsday. And again, like I said, we all know kind of the writings on the wall that, across the board, as we've discussed with other elected officials like the county executive and other folks, that, the money just isn't there. And there's so much need now more than ever for additional kind of programs like we talked about with safety protocols, with this technology that's, kind of essentially scrubbing the air to make sure everyone's safe and feels comfortable on the ridership. And I mean, restoring some ridership and being on the train. But, it's hard. It's a hard balance where you have to put that initial investment in. But, you have to slowly trickle back in the return to rate of service that you were seeing. So I guess we want to maybe just break down some of those issues a little bit further. We know, like you said, specifically around maybe the look for federal funding. Realistically, like you said, I know that's the prospect of hoping for maybe down the line. But as we see right now in federal, level discussions, there doesn't seem to be much hope until then. So what else can be done, short of, it looks like the discussion is for borrowing money, right, for maybe private equity. I know you've written something about that, maybe borrowing $3 billion, or I'm not sure from what the source is. But could you speak maybe a little bit more about that, other options besides just waiting? Yeah,
the $3 billion would be a federal loan. It is a program run by the U.S. Treasury, I believe. It's interesting. Some of the financial experts really say this should be the last resort, beyond even some of the more visible, painful cuts for commuters, talking about service cuts and layoffs and fare hikes. And the reason they say that this borrowing should be the last resort is because they're obviously going to need to pay this money back. And I think in relatively a short period of time, I think the loan duration would be like 3 years. So you're kind of rolling the dice that you're in pretty good shape in 3 years. And there's really no telling. I mean, some of the forecasts about how long the impact on ridership will be go well beyond 3 years. And I certainly there's a lot of people who wonder if a good percentage of the railroad's usual riders are gone for good. And that's because, many have discovered telecommuting, many have changed jobs, many aren't working at all. So I don't, even if we snapped our fingers and, the pandemic was gone tomorrow, I don't know that everybody just returns to the Long Island Railroad. So borrowing that money, taking on another $3 billion of debt without any kind of guarantee that your financial fortunes will be good enough in 3 years that you'll be able to pay this back, may only deepen your hole. I mean, that might end up just another $3 billion liability on top of everything else.
Exactly.
Well, it almost seems as though the $3.9 billion first happened in an atmosphere where there was the feeling that this would recover, and now it kind of seems like the general consensus is that the railroad is not going to come back to its former glory, and they're going to have to kind of assess things and see where they think it's going to be in the next few years before they're going to turn around and hand over $12 billion.
Right. It's so kind of fluid. I remember, when these discussions first came up, I think it was maybe their February monthly board meeting, and there was a question by a reporter in the Q&A with the chairman, Pat Foy, after the meeting. And this was still kind of this newfangled thing, this coronavirus we're hearing about. And somebody asked a question about, what kind of protocols were being taken place. And it wasn't that the chairman blew it off or anything like that, but it certainly didn't seem like it was the highest priority. It did, and that's no fault to them. I think everybody was kind of in the same boat. They just felt like this thing that, like, all right, it'll be here for a little while, and we'll get past it. And here we are, all these months later, and right. So they were back in March. They talked about how they needed that $3.9 billion, how important it would be. And they got it. And almost as soon as they got it, they were saying, well, we need another $3.9 billion. And then that 3.9 became 12. And I mean, who knows at the end of 2021 where they're at? I guess they got to take it one step at a time. I do think that asking for so much, going from the original ask of $3.9 billion now to $12 billion, kind of maybe makes it harder, less palatable to some in Washington. So that's just a strategic decision they made to ask for all of it now, rather than, I guess, asking for some now and more down the line. But yeah, they're in a jam, and as you mentioned, one of the problems is at the same time this ridership and revenue is not coming in. There's no shortage of expenses, and even new expenses, right? Because there's cleaning, there's all these different technologies that they're experimenting with. There's a cost to all this, and then the money that they rely on to pay for a lot of those costs is just not coming in.
Yeah, even the rates being discounted, off-peak, returning recently, and the MTA system as a whole, with buses obviously not collecting fares for a while throughout the city. So it really is comprehensive. I guess one thing, though, again, we do see that thankfully there is bipartisan support here on Long Island's delegation. All the members, correct? Zeldin through Meeks, all support obviously more funding. It seems correct.
Yeah, that's right. There were a couple of letters written by the Republican delegation expressing their support for another rescue of the MTA. Even that said, I still think there's an extra level of pressure on some of the Republicans, and I think Zeldin in particular. I know there was a rally held on Ronkonkoma a few weeks ago that was really kind of targeted towards Zeldin. I think the thought is, you're a Trump guy, you're his ally, you've got his ear, you can make a difference here. We saw Congressman Zeldin speak at the RNC some weeks back. So I do think that maybe people expect Schumer and some others to be in the camp with MTA pushing for this funding, but a guy like Zeldin, I think they see as potentially really a difference maker here. And he's made it clear that he does support them. He's written these letters. I think some are hoping to see more from him.
Okay, and then just quickly, what about on the state level? Because again, as we said, we know that this kind of problem has expanded on every level of government and every realm of life, obviously. But is there any prospect of the state having the capacity to push that type of, some type of funding that would make a difference in LIRR's prospect, maybe short term, long term?
Well, clearly, the governor and state legislators have said they're not in any kind of position to do more than they already do. One idea that has been floated among some MTA board members who I think aren't too keen on the idea of just being so reliant on the federal government, sort of helpless, is a gas tax. The New Jersey has done this and it's generated a lot of revenue for them. Some said, here's a way that we could kind of help ourselves, a fraction of a cent on every gallon or something like that. And you dedicate that money to the MTA. And I don't know if it gets them all the way out of this jam, but it certainly starts to help. And look, there are all kinds of ways that the MTA could cut their own costs. They said they're doing a lot of that, unloading a lot of these outside consultants. They're paring down the capital program. It's a $51.5 billion capital program. A year ago, they were sort of sitting pretty with this giant capital program that they were very proud of, very ambitious. Now there's a thought that it really needs to be pared down to kind of the bare bones. I think they're reluctant to do that because there were so many important projects in there, and who knows, when you can return to some of those. But also the other part of that, and this is kind of related, kind of not, was that the capital program was largely dependent on this congestion pricing plan that would create no new tolls in Manhattan. And that's not going anywhere either, right? So they were now expecting about $1 billion a year in new toll revenue from that. That's also just sort of stuck waiting for federal approval from the U.S. DOT. And actually, from the $12 billion that the MTA is asking for from a bailout, $1 billion of that is money they said that they would have had now in new toll revenues if the feds hadn't held up congestion pricing. So, it's just bad on top of bad over at the MTA. Yeah,
cascading effect, definitely.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, of all the cuts, the reductions they've talked about, I think the one that's sort of been the most alarming for Long Island Railroad commuters is this idea of reduced schedules and drastically reduced. They're talking about on the busier lines. I mean, lines where people these days might be used to a train coming every 15 minutes, 20 minutes, those going to every hour, and then less used lines going to every 2 hours, and potentially some lines being eliminated altogether. I know where I live, I'm right near the West Hempstead branch, and they haven't said as much, but I know a lot of folks who use the West Hempstead branch are particularly nervous because ridership is a lot more modest than on most other lines. The last time the MTA was in a fiscal crisis about 10 years ago, they cut weekend service on the West Hempstead line. So now there's a thought that they'd be the first on the chopping block, along with a few other routes that don't carry the number of riders that some of their busier routes are. And so and the effects of that are huge. I mean, folks who live in those communities wouldn't have a train station anymore. Now, what does that mean? Or do they find themselves driving to other stations and other branches? What does that add to your commuting time? Where do you park your car? Or you have to pay more to park?
ADA accessibility kind of projects too that were slated.
Yeah. So huge cascading effect.
Just a reminder that for our listening audience, you're listening to 90.3 WHPC, the voice of Nassau Community College, and we're here talking with Alfonso Castillo from Newsday about the current state of the Long Island Railroad.
And there's all kinds of other projects that are potentially in the chopping block. One that's kind of interesting that I don't think a lot of people know about was in this capital program that we're in the middle of. one of the more important projects for the Long Island Railroad was the electrification of the central branch. Now, this is a track that most people don't even know, I think, exists, that runs north-south between the Babylon line and the main line. It basically connects Babylon to Hicksville. They use it now kind of in a pinch. I think there's a handful of trains that are scheduled to make that connection each day. Freight trains use it quite a bit. But the railroad president, Phil Eng, since he came in, really kind of targeted this as a potential difference maker when there is some kind of service disruption, and basically you can't move on one of the two main lines, the Ronkonkoma line or the Babylon line, which are the two of the busiest. Then you could just kind of jump over to the other track. You make that north-south connection. And you could do that a lot more easily if it was electrified, because you could do it on any train, not just diesel trains. So that was in this capital program, and they've specified that is one project that they would have to reconsider if the money wasn't there. So that'd be out.
Yeah, well, that's important. Alfonso, if they do stop a capital program, is it are they able to use the money from that program for operating expenses?
I think there'd have to be some special exceptions made. Some that's already been made. I mean, I think there's some money that is kept in a state lockbox that is for capital costs that they've already gotten authorization to dip into. I imagine the legislature would be understanding in this situation if some money would have to be moved around, because again, the difference between the capital budgets and the operating budgets, and I know to sort of laymen, whatever, money is money, but one pays for these longer term projects. That's money that's kind of set aside. That's the money that you put aside to put a new roof on your house, that kind of thing. Right. And the others just kind of keep the lights on, right? So that's the money that pays your employees every day. It pays for the fuel in your buses. Again, the day-to-day expenses, and the two are mostly kept separate. But obviously, in an emergency situation like this, some of that might have to be reconsidered. And the capital program, which again was. They had a lot of real ambitious plans for this capital program, a lot of accessibility projects, loads of stations, subway stations, even some railroad stations that were not handicap accessible, were going to be made accessible through this program. There's a thought that, again, that all goes out the window, and the only thing that gets saved is what they call the state of good repair projects, just the routine maintenance stuff to keep the system in good shape as it is now, and these more important capacity expansion projects just have to be put on hold. Now, that's not done yet, but certainly a lot of people are talking about that.
What about also, Alfonso, but it was PTC, right? The positive train control, I think, or that technology. Oh. Has that been impacted? Is that I know there was a push to get that installed more on lines with MTA. How has that been impacted?
Yeah. Well, actually, the MTA says they're in pretty good shape and on target for meeting that deadline. It's been a real bumpy, more than 10 years now since that mandate came out. And I think during a lot of periods over those 10, 12 years, there was a real thought whether they wouldn't get this done on time. But the last report that they put out and the Federal Railroad Administration put out shows that they seem to be in pretty good shape to make that deadline. There is still some work to be done. But the vast majority of the LIRR system now has this technology installed. I think there's a few places where they still have to get it done. I think in Queens, near Jamaica, over by the Harold Interlocking, they've got to get those pieces of the tracks online. And I know that there was a big issue with interoperability. And a lot of that was relying on Amtrak doing some work. So basically, the LIRR system and Amtrak's system have to work seamlessly, and there were some obstacles in the way of that. Both sides have expressed that they're not. They're pretty optimistic that gets resolved by this December deadline. And to their credit, I mean, it appears that they have been able to make progress throughout the entire pandemic. And I think it's taken some creativity on their part, some kind of inspections and checks that they do on some of this equipment that are usually done in person. They've done, remotely using cameras. So I think knowing the seriousness and the importance of that project, they've really pushed ahead and made sure that it wasn't affected by this pandemic.
Let's remind our listeners again that they are listening to this week's Long Island News here on 90.3 WHPC FM, and we are here with Newsday's transit reporter Alfonso Castillo. Bill, definitely want to hear some more of your thoughts. I know there's a lot of other topics. I know something we did also mention a little bit with the president too was the nature of the fines, that there had been a law passed at the state level regarding that, but it doesn't look like there's been a lot of actual fines given out. Maybe, I don't know, do you have any thoughts about that, Bill, and Alfonso, obviously?
The fines went into place, I guess, about a month ago now, and certainly there was a lot of interest in how many would be given out. And I know the first report that they gave, which was probably a couple of weeks after the fines were implemented, they said just one fine had been given throughout the MTA, so that would include subways as well. Now, some people looked at this as well. Then these fines aren't really working. It's not effective if they've only given one. But the MTA has pointed out that this is a good thing. I mean, the fact that we're not giving fines means that people are complying. And really, I don't know who gets a fine because the point is the fine is very much the last resort. So it's not that, as I understand it, it's not that a police officer sees you without a mask, comes over to you and hands you a ticket. That officer is going to urge you to put your mask on. If you don't have one, he's going to offer you a mask. So if you get a fine, it's because you really don't want to put on a mask. You're really refusing. And the other thing that you could do in that situation is just not take the train, and then you won't be at risk of getting a fine. But again, the person who gets the fine would have to really be insistent that I am riding this train and I am not wearing a mask. So not surprised to hear that there haven't been many handed out.
They're not just walking around handing out tickets. They're actually handing out masks.
Exactly.
People don't have them.
The MTA had mask ambassadors, I think, too. I know they were on the subway. I don't know if they were on Long Island Railroad, but I know elected officials, a lot of people are doing those types of events, giving out, masks to commuters and stuff like that. And I think there were even some maybe vending machines, I think we saw. Right. So they've got
their mask force. So managers, other workers at the Long Island Railroad positioned themselves in a lot of different stations, handing out these masks. Like you talked about, there are some places where there are vending machines. I remember early on in this pandemic, I had to go to an event in Hicksville, get out of my car, realize I didn't have my mask, and sure enough, there was a table right there by the escalator, a couple Long Island Railroad employees, and a bunch of masks, and I grabbed one. So, it is the person who doesn't have a mask. I don't think it's by mistake. Now, that said, another thing that you hear a lot is not just the person who doesn't have the mask, but the person who's got it around their chin, who's got it in their hand. I think that you probably see a lot more of that. Folks who feel like they've got a good amount of distance from each other on a train might slip it off their chin. And there are clearly people who are uneasy about it. I hear from folks all the time. On social media, you'll see a lot of public shaming of these people without masks. The railroad, for their part, says mask compliance is very high. It did dip some weeks back before those fines were enacted, but was always in over 90% range, and now they say it's around 98%. My observation is, the vast majority of people have masks.
Alfonso, something, like we're saying, that obviously it's a concern of the ridership and obviously management at the MTA, but also the employees. I know that the union obviously has been, probably very directly involved in these conversations and trying to keep their membership safe. And also they have been involved in those discussions. I know you wrote about an agreement between, I think, MTA and the union to take about a 10% pay cut, I think, if that's correct. And does that transfer over to Long Island Railroad employees too, or is that MTA wide, or more specifically to not them?
Those are members of the Transportation Communication Union, which does include a lot of Long Island Railroad workers. They're the folks who work in the ticket offices and have a lot of different jobs. I think they're also station cleaners, are all under that that union. And I'm not positive, what the status of that agreement was, but at least when it was a tentative agreement some weeks ago, there was a few things at play here. One of it was some workers concerned about having to return to the office. A lot of them are administrative workers, and they've been doing their jobs from home and have been able to. The temporary agreement that allowed them to work from home was coming up, so they were going to have to return to the office. And I think there were some concerns about whether there would be the capacity in offices to allow them to return to a safe environment. In the meantime, on the other side, with this financial crisis, there was a threat of layoffs looming. So there were a few different things at play, and they came to this agreement where workers would be allowed to continue working from home through the end of the year. But in exchange, they would take a 10% pay cut. Now, I've heard from folks who are not happy about this and don't want that 10% pay cut, obviously. But the other kind of a part of that agreement was that there was a promise that no members of the TCU would be laid off through the end of this year. No guarantee, what 2021 looks like, but it at least, I guess, keeps them whole through the end of the year. But yeah, I mean, unions have been really, really concerned. And don't forget, before all this wasn't the best relationship in the world. I mean, it was a very strained relationship between the MTA and certainly its unions at the Long Island Railroad. And I think on the transit side as well, all the allegations of overtime abuse and all of that. Mm-hmm. So this was a pretty strained relationship. And then at least at the outset of the pandemic appeared to get a lot better, a lot strengthened. I think everybody kind of stepped up and worked together, put their differences aside to keep the railroad running through those early months of the pandemic. And then when the financial crisis really hit and the MTA started talking layoffs, I think a lot of this kind of returned, a lot of these hard feelings returned, and MTA workers feeling that they've been making the ultimate sacrifice throughout the pandemic. And, you talk about how we were losing so many folks a day. The MTA was losing.
Yes, I was going to ask you that.
Yeah, bigger than NYPD, bigger than FDNY. I mean, I think the last count they had through June, they lost, I think, 131 MTA employees, thousands infected.
I have a friend who's retired from the MTA, and it seemed to me like every day he was posting 5 or 6 names of fellow retirees or guys still on the job active. And I started to, it was only anecdotal evidence, but I thought if I just count his numbers, they're dropping like flies.
They were, dying in huge numbers. Thankfully, that subsided some months back. The MTA did have its first death in a few months, just a week or two ago, and it was a Long Island Railroad worker, only the second Long Island Railroad worker to die in the pandemic. But I've also heard from some sources that that there may be an uptick in infections in recent weeks. That you would expect that. We see an uptick all over the place, so it would be expected that there'd be a little uptick among some MTA workers as well. And because of that, and because they've been on the front lines, I think they really kind of found it offensive that layoffs would even be on the table, for them, and looking for guarantees that their jobs would be safe. The flip side of that is you get some financial expert types who question the need for the size of the workforce that the MTA has, which is more than 70,000 employees, when you're moving a small fraction of the riders that you were a year ago. So, a lot of things in play.
Yeah, hazard pay, and like you said, a lot of moving pieces. Like you said, both short term and long term.
The MTA also has to consider keeping its force somewhat intact in case it does come back. I mean, we're kind of using our crystal ball, saying, "Well, it's never going to be bad." But what if it did?
Yeah. Do you hire people, and do they not have the same, protections in terms of, pension or other maybe agreements, the new employees as some of the people who would have been, grandfathered in. But right. Yeah. I don't know. It is a lot. It is, like you said, a crazy time, and, how much it's impacting, every aspect of life, the way we travel. I know you also wrote about the kind of looks like change in traffic. Well, maybe not change, but how much time people are spending on Long Island in their cars in traffic, and seeing just how, again, that commute is just changing, and how DOT and reporters like yourself are monitoring that information, so that hopefully policy and these types of decisions from these agencies can be made. But it really is, like I said, a whole new world, and trying to figure out from the challenges we had, where we're going with the challenges we have now.
I think it's up to the actuarials now.
Well,
who sit down with the pencil and tell us what will be.
You need qualitative data, though, too. You need people saying there's still all these other things. But it seems like that's how it is a lot of times. But I don't know. Like I said, there are those things that we spoke about. Alfonso, I guess in the next just a few minutes, or a little bit of time we have left, rather, what do you think again? What do you see? Obviously, there was discussion about funding being pulled from even the cost reimbursement from the federal government for a lot of this technology to keep the train safe, rather, sanitation protocols and stuff like that. I know that's a discussion that's ongoing, but what should we be following in the next couple of weeks and months, I guess, until going forward, maybe evolving around LIRR?
Yeah, well, statutorily, they are required to present a balanced budget by the end of the year. So they have their monthly board meeting. The next one's coming up this week, I believe, on Wednesday. They're virtual these days, so anybody can tune in on Zoom, linking through the MTA website. And they've said, typically the way it works is by November, they present a balanced budget. So whatever it is that they're going to do to close that budget gap and balance their budget, it's going to be presented, you would think, by November, and then voted on at the December monthly board meeting. And we will see. I think the prospect of this federal loan buys them a little time. So maybe the most drastic, severe of measures, you could probably be put off at least some months if that federal loan comes through, which I don't think is any kind of guarantee, but there's certainly a lot of optimism about it. Another interesting thing that hasn't gotten, I think, too much attention is, pandemic aside, the MTA was due to vote on a fare increase this year. Yeah. And that typically also happens around the same time. And it's supposed to be 4% every other year. So typically it's right around now that they put forth a plan to raise fares and tolls, usually around November, December, hold some public hearings, and then vote on it in December. And it takes effect early next year. We haven't heard a whole lot about, whether that's on track to move forward. The MTA hasn't said much one way or the other, and has even suggested that, there are folks who think there shouldn't be a fare increase at all, given a number of things, given the financial situation that a lot of commuters find themselves in, them dealing with their own hardships because of the pandemic. And also the reality is that, whatever it is that they're paying for, the average Long Island Railroad commuter pays, I forget what it is. It's probably $350 or more. And in a lot of communities, a lot more than that. If you're commuting from Suffolk County, you're paying $500. Yeah. And the service is still not back to where it was pre-pandemic levels. So if you raised fares on these folks, you'd literally be paying more for less. So there's certainly a thought that this is not the time to increase fares. You want to attract riders. You want the ridership to come back. So I know that there is a call from some board members to put off any kind of fare increase. Some have even suggested maybe a fare decrease. I think that's a lot less likely. But the MTA hasn't signaled in one way or another, and have said that not only does that fare increase remain on the table, but they're not ruling out a fare increase on top of the fare increase, which is something that the chairman of the MTA unequivocally said we would not do for the first several months of the pandemic, and then I think just reality hit, and they realized that's not a promise that they can make anymore. So who knows what that percentage could be? That's something that I think people should pay close attention to in the coming months. So yeah, I mean, I think between now and the end of the year, we're going to find out a lot about, where they're going and what kind of steps they need to take to close that budget gap.
Yeah, it's a lot to consider. It's a lot to cover. And we know we'll be watching your reporting closely as you always do a great job shining a light on a lot of the complexity behind these types of topics.
Yeah, definitely.
And, we'll thank Newsday, and, we'll urge our listeners to definitely, again, follow your reporting there, obviously in Newsday. And if they want to find you on social media, on Twitter specifically, at Alfonso Reports.
Yes, that's right. Yes.
Yep. So
very good.
Thank you again, Alfonso.
Thank you, guys. Thanks, John.
Thank you for your time. Yep.
Thank you so much. And hopefully we'll talk to you soon.
Absolutely. Okay? Anytime.
Yep.
Thank you.
Care.
Thank you so much.
Weekend. Thanks.
Well, we of course want to thank Alfonso Castillo for coming and talking to us, and we also want to thank Newsday for making the reporters available to us during our show. Well, John, what do you think? Do you see it being fixed?
I mean,
that's all I could say.
Like the issue was already beforehand. That was the question. I think, will it be fixed? Will we ever be able to balance some sort of a budget and, afford the things we need to still invest in, but also, not get further kind of encumbered? I don't know. I think, that the definition of fixed is the issue, I think, because there will be probably service, decreased in certain elements and things that we all are looking forward to, potentially things like, again, accessibility enhancements, things that it shouldn't be, I think of this issue, of this situation, but unfortunately maybe, will wind up happening and they'll get, some kind of, just grit your teeth and just take your medicine kind of approach.
Well, they're going to have to be. They're going to have to be things that go by the wayside. They just are.
No, I get it.
I remember years ago, I don't exactly know how the financial system of the MTA works, but I do know that a few years ago, the tolls, like when you went over the Triborough Bridge and paid that toll, that money went to the MTA. Yeah. People would constantly ask, well, what are you doing with all the money? Well, it was going to run the subways.
Well, that's what Alfonso was talking about, though, with congestion pricing, something that was directly tied to funding these large-scale capital projects. And if that was the premise, then what do you do? Like I said, I
understand the federal government turned that down or stopped that process.
In terms of what specifically?
That they can't do it. They haven't done congestion because I think Alfonso said that the federal government stop to it.
They did challenge it, and it's still, I think, something that is slated to, because it has been passed at the state level. It's in the appeal, is my understanding. So it's something that they don't intend to give up, and they think still will hopefully pass, but kind of maybe like the other issues, maybe in the next administration or just in a longer legal kind of fight. But the real thing was too that they had decided that even if they could, they're not going to enact that now because it just wasn't feasible. There wasn't even the volume of traffic, coming into the city at the time it was supposed to take place, that the policy just didn't make sense. So they had to postpone it, kind of like the plastic bag ban and other things that kind of got slated to move further down the line. But I don't know. It's a lot. It's a lot always moving, and it's a lot for people of Long Island to have to really kind of wrestle with it without in addition to everything else, just in your daily life that you have to deal with. These to consider these large multi-billion, $100 billion deals, but they do have an impact. They have an impact on what you pay, directly or indirectly.
And it will be for years to come. I mean, if the railroad gets impacted, immensely by this, I don't know, this section of time, and coming out the other side, it could be a whole different thing. Like he was saying, imagine being on the South Shore and there's, 10 trains a day. I can't imagine that, but
oh no, it's insane, and thinking, like they said, like he was talking about, that one specific project that can connect from the north shore to the south shore in case of an emergency, where it's something like that, where,
right.
Again, that thing had been pushed off for a long time. That was something that was needed, because otherwise you get all these shuttle buses and you got to figure out this whole complicated network, because that's it. They're all running, just horizontal out east and west. So,
well, some of the capital projects actually make sense, because down the road, the things you need to do then will cost less.
Yeah, and that hasn't changed because of the virus. That there still will be blizzards, there still will be hurricanes,
right?
Stuff like that. Regardless. So, and that's the last thing you want. Yeah.
I think we're winding down. The clock is running out.
A few more minutes left. I guess in that brief time, though, Bill, I know maybe we did discuss it, and we'll go into this more a little bit next week, but let's obviously remind everyone that the elections are coming up very, very quickly. It almost seems hard to believe, but November 3rd, quickly approaching, Election Day. We did want to remind our listeners and encourage them to consider looking into also maybe requesting an absentee ballot if they're interested, or learning about where they could vote at their early voting site. To do so, you can go to your county board of election, whether it be Nassau or Suffolk, get all the information there. You could enter in your address. They'll tell you exactly what you need to know and how you could, like I said, apply for an absentee ballot. Because these types of decisions, like I said, where it comes to federal funding, state funding, they're made by the people we vote for. And, it does matter. So, definitely always try to make your vote count. That's my PSA, I guess, for the day.
Good for you. Sounded good.
Also because the census now is technically officially over as of today. While we're broadcasting this, it was kind of a back and forth. Yep.
That got cut pretty abruptly, huh?
Yeah, it got cut abruptly. Then it got re-extended to where it was supposed to be, but then it got cut again. And this is all post the date that it would have been if there wasn't COVID. So it's been pretty messy, and hopefully the data is good, because that data is very important. It impacts what we just mentioned, who, can run in what areas and how those lines are drawn in all these races. So it is something that, we all need to keep monitoring. But like I said, that is now ending. So if you haven't done it today, you can't do it by mail anymore. That's done. I think you can still maybe do it by phone or online, but I think, you might have run out. Try to look today, but that's the deadline. But definitely get ready to vote. And we'll have more coverage and try to break down some of those congressional races and try to, kind of just discuss who's running and, give you the information you need to make your own decisions on who to vote for.
Beautiful.
So, okay. There we go.
Well, I guess that's another edition. We'll wrap it up. We want to thank Alfonso Castillo again, and of course, from Newsday for making the reporters available. And also, of course, the Long Island Railroad President, Phil Eng. Again, we were very appreciative to have his. We got him for very, very critical. Like I said, this is all not abstract to him. Like, we're just talking about it, from our Zoom rooms here. If you could see the footage, he was right there. You had the trains in the background. You had like a command center. He's a man hard at work. So we're happy for his time, and we're happy to get some of his input. And we know how much he cares, obviously, about the mission and the people who ride LIRR like ourselves. So, and the thing we can get from all this is that they are trying. Nobody's just sitting on their laurels waiting for things to happen. They're actually trying to make it work, because it's going to affect Long Islanders. Someday we could turn around and there won't be a railroad. We can't let that happen. Yeah. You think you hate traffic now on the Southern State? Wait until then. Yeah. Oh my goodness. Exactly. Anyway, we want to thank everyone, and we'll see you next time right here on 90.3 WHPC.